The Iran war could have united the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
But Iran's attacks have turned the Gulf on its head, hitting tourism, the oil industry, and a whole way of life, and leaving Saudi Arabia and the UAE more divided than ever. On the map, Saudi Arabia dominates, but its smaller neighbor, the UAE, wants to dominate too. And a potential nuclear deal between Saudi Arabia and the US could see this rivalry escalate and split a region at breaking point. The leaders of Saudi Arabia and the UAE used to be close, cuddly even. Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed have similar nicknames, and even had a mentor-mentee thing going on. They're both authoritarian rulers and royals. Oil made their countries rich. The United Arab Emirates, also known as the Emirates, is here in the Middle East. On the map, it's overshadowed by its much bigger neighbor, Saudi Arabia, which has a bigger population. Both are on the Persian Gulf and are considered Gulf states alongside these countries.
Saudi Arabia is the largest regional country and therefore has ambitions to be the undisputed leader.
Cinzia Bianco researches politics and security in the Gulf region.
The UAE, while being much, much smaller and having a much smaller population, also has a very grand ambitions of its own and has been able, over the course of the decades, to develop capital and assets that basically enlarge its size from a small country into a middle power.
This has become a heated rivalry. The United Arab Emirates built the tallest building in the world. Now, Saudi Arabia wants an even bigger one. A UAE royal bought up football clubs. Then the Saudis wanted to play too.
Habibi, come to Dubai.
The UAE transformed its biggest city, Dubai, into a hub for international travel and business, a bubble of luxury. All part of a strategy to diversify the economy and become less dependent on oil. Saudi Arabia wants to be a hub too, and is pushing businesses to move to Riyadh.
Basically, the Saudis have been catching up to the Emiratis.
But the Iran war has thrown everything off course. After the US and Israel attacked Iran, part of Iran's response was to strike the Gulf states, which have long been US allies. Here are some of the locations of strikes and damage. The countries attacked host US bases or military facilities, but Iran also hit civilian targets. We'll come back to the role of the US later, including that new nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia. The UAE was particularly hard hit by Iranian attacks.
There was a lack of solidarity that was perceived in the UAE. The Emiratis had expectations that Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf monarchies would be more proactive into siding with them.
Then the UAE struck out on its own. It went rogue on the oil market by leaving OPEC, the global cartel of oil-producing nations. Why? The UAE wants to sell more oil without OPEC limitations. And now it also needs to rebuild after Iran's attacks. But here's the thing, the UAE is ditching an organization that is basically led by Saudi Arabia.
It is a significant blow to the relationship. It could ultimately push other members to also leave OPEC. And that would be a huge problem for Saudi Arabia because it weakens their leadership.
Saudi Arabia's claim to regional leadership is also based on religion. Mecca is considered the holiest city in Islam.
It is the leader of the Arab Muslim world. Saudi Arabia wants to be able to play an outsized role into determining the regional future from a political perspective as well.
And that's where Iran comes into play again. Iran also wants to be the religious leader in the region. Iran follows a different branch of Islam than most countries here, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And Iran wants to maximize its political influence as well. That's why it supports a network of militias and proxies, which have been fighting for Iranian interests and destabilizing the Middle East. So Iran is a common enemy of both Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They have been working together to curb Iran's influence, like in Yemen. Yemen borders Saudi Arabia directly and is on the entrance to the Red Sea in the south. In 2015, Saudi Arabia led a coalition of Gulf states to fight against the Houthis, one of those Iranian-backed proxies. And the UAE was Saudi Arabia's main partner in the fight. For years, the two countries carried out airstrikes on Yemen, killing thousands of civilians. Andreas Krieg specializes in Middle East security, with a focus on the Gulf.
I don't think the UAE and Saudi Arabia were ever aligned on Yemen. This was an illusion, I think.
While the Saudis continued backing the government, in 2017, the UAE started backing a different group, a new separatist movement in the south. Though when we asked UAE officials, they denied that they stopped supporting Yemen's government. They previously denied supporting separatists in Yemen.
Controlling the south of Yemen for the Emiratis was really more about commercial and geopolitical opportunity rather than actually fighting the Houthis. And over time, it became clear to the Saudis that they were stuck on their own, fighting the Houthis in the north. And the Saudis really waited until it was no longer bearable, and it all escalated in late 2025.
That was when Saudi forces attacked a port that was under the control of separatists reportedly backed by the UAE. This confrontation showed Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have become geopolitical rivals.
The Emiratis are building their own sort of empire, if you will, in the south, completely disconnected from Saudi interest.
An empire? To understand the UAE's wider game plan, let's go to the Yemeni Socotra Islands. They're the only place in the world that has these crazy bleeding trees. Anyway, Socotra has become an unusual tourist destination in a country at war. There used to be direct flights from Dubai. In 2018, the UAE deployed forces here, and then the separatists it backed were in control. These satellite images show an airstrip the UAE allegedly built as part of military infrastructure on the islands. On the construction pictures, it definitely looks like whoever built this base is pretty into the UAE. We also asked the UAE about its presence on Socotra. Officials told us the UAE has withdrawn all its forces from Yemen and is no longer involved there. It has previously said its presence on Socotra was only humanitarian. Andreas Krieg disagrees.
So they've had build bases not just on Socotra, which is, if you look at it again geographically, it's like a geographic aircraft carrier right in this waterway.
Okay, so that's why they are so interested in Socotra, the location. The Socotra Islands sit right at the entrance to the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, a key maritime trade corridor.
For the UAE, this is an opportunity outside of their sphere of influence. If you look at where the UAE are geographically, they're projecting that influence far beyond their border because they want to be a major player in controlling global supply chains.
When it comes to strategic access to water, Saudi Arabia has a big geographic advantage over the UAE. It has access to the Strait of Hormuz, but also borders the Red Sea. The UAE only has access to the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iran war has made it pretty clear that depending on just one waterway can become a problem. The UAE strategy of creating footholds on the Red Sea goes beyond Yemen. In Sudan, the UAE is backing the rebel RSF militia fighting against the Sudanese armed forces, though the UAE has long denied that. One aim? To have access to the sea there. In Somalia, the UAE is backing the breakaway region of Somaliland, which also just happens to be located on the sea. The UAE got permission from separatist Somaliland to build a military base. Since then, this deep water port, suitable for military vessels, was built. And this airstrip was modernized. It's unclear if and how these facilities are being used by the UAE military. We asked the UAE about the use of this port, but they sidestepped the question and didn't respond to a follow-up. But the UAE has become an influential player in the whole Horn of Africa, with political alliances, investments, and military support.
The UAE, they're all about control. So they've built a major network of non-state actors and kind of, again, armed non-state actors to kind of build enclaves where they can project immense influence. What the Emiratis are doing, they're undermining territorial integrity. They're dividing up these countries, creating entry points for divide and rule.
Saudi Arabia believes that it is very risky to try and empower non-state actors with the idea of them ultimately becoming the state actor, and would rather pursue a less risky strategy.
So Saudi Arabia usually supports the government in all the conflicts we mentioned, while the UAE is backing non-state actors. And that pits the UAE and Saudi Arabia against each other, fueling civil wars like the one in Sudan and regional conflicts. And there's another player dividing Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Israel. The UAE is reportedly working alongside Israel in the Red Sea region, including at that potential military facility we saw in Somaliland. Israel was the first country to recognize the breakaway region. And guess what? According to reports, Israel also had, or maybe still has, a military and intelligence presence on Socotra, that Yemeni island group. We asked Israel about its cooperation with the UAE in these locations, but officials didn't get back to us in time for publication. One thing we found in loads of reports is that the UAE employed the Israeli Iron Dome system during the Iran war. It was the first known use of the air defense technology outside of Israel or the US. The cooperation goes back to the Abraham Accords. They kicked off diplomatic ties between Israel and the UAE.
The UAE wanted access to Israeli technology. They wanted access to the Israeli economy.
But what about Saudi Arabia? The Saudis also considered normalizing relations with Israel. But Israel's actions after Hamas' October 7th terror attack put all that on hold. The war in Gaza, its fighting in Lebanon, and its strikes on Iran along with the US. So now the Saudis and the UAE see Israel quite differently.
Saudi Arabia believe that Israel and Iran both need to be contained. We see the UAE, which was getting closer to Israel and saying, we cannot compare Iran and Israel because one has been shooting at us repeatedly and the other one has actually been protecting us, in specifically the UAE.
And by the way, those Abraham Accords bring us back to the US. The US brokered them. The US has long been considered the security guarantor in the region. Remember, the Gulf states were targeted by Iran in the US-Israeli war because of those US bases and facilities.
This Iran war, this war between Israel, US, and Iran has been the most transformational for the Gulf. A lot of the security assumptions that were held very firmly that the US-led order will deliver security have been shattered. The US is no longer there or unable, unwilling to provide regional security. I think what we're seeing is a much more multipolar, multi-pillar sort of regional order, where the US is gradually withdrawing.
Just as we thought we had finished this video, something big happened. The US announced a new, controversial nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia. The agreement would give Saudi Arabia a civilian nuclear program with the help of US companies. Critics say it could lead to Saudi Arabia enriching its own uranium, which is necessary for developing nuclear weapons, and even to a nuclear race in the region. For context, the UAE already has a nuclear deal with the US that paved the way for the first nuclear power plant in the oil-rich Gulf. But this deal is more restrictive and doesn't allow the UAE to enrich its own uranium. So the US new deal with Saudi Arabia seems like a win for Riyadh. There's a catch though. Trump now says the deal is conditional upon Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, i.e. normalizing relations with Israel, which, as we saw, Saudi Arabia does not want to do. While the UAE has been deepening ties with Israel, Saudi Arabia has been looking for additional security partners to the US too, like Pakistan, another Muslim-majority country. The two countries already signed a mutual defense agreement. During the Iran war, Pakistan has supported Saudi Arabia, sending jets and troops, despite also acting as a mediator in the conflict. Bear with us because we're about to mention even more players. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have also been deepening ties with Egypt and Turkey. Turkey might even join the Saudi-Pakistani Defense Alliance, along with Qatar. So all these countries are working together in a sort of coalition, while the UAE is deepening ties with Israel and staying close to the US.
I think the Iran war was a stress test for all of the Gulf monarchies, and it has accelerated a lot of pre-existing trends.
Like that rivalry between Saudi Arabia and the UAE over economic dominance and geopolitical influence in the region.
That the differences are there, and they are unlikely to get lighter. They could actually get heavier. They will, however, most probably stay right below the surface.
Geography is one reason why that rivalry probably won't escalate into a conflict.
The UAE is where it is. It is wedged between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It cannot sort of pull itself out of its geographic context. Saudi Arabia is the neighbor you cannot ignore. The only way forward for the Gulf, as prisoners of geography as they all are, is that they work together rather than against each other.
But with the whole Middle East still on edge, these two rivals seem to be growing further apart.